Aloha. Good morning. Hope everyone's having a good Sunday morning, preparing for your day or relaxing or doing whatever it is you do to keep yourself sane. George here. Got a couple book reviews to do for you. This particular morning show is going to be how a couple ways that I have found propaganda has penetrated my life and kind of weaved its tentacles around the way people think, kind of shaped the way we act, and how it really is the root of our culture, this groupthink. And what better place to start than right here? Mr. George Orwell, 1984. Right, this is a classic. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you've read this book. If you haven't read this book 3 or 4 times, then there's probably something wrong with you. You should definitely do it. I think it takes about 3 or 4 times just to really understand what's in there. For this particular conversation, I'm going to be talking about the telescreen. Remember in some of the beginning scenes, you got Winston Smith in there, and he's just being told to do what his TV tells him to do, and he finds a little spot in the corner where he can kind of hide out, a little blind spot. And it's amazing how relevant that is today. With today's technology, the smart TVs, those TVs are watching you. They got their mics on, the cameras on, recording everything that happens in your house, especially if you have Alexa. It's like a double whammy. So that's one way the whole telescreen has been brought into today's world. I mean, this book was written in 1948. It's almost like there was a plan. If you were of the conspiratorial type, then you would say, man, that was a blueprint. So let me tie it together with this book that I read right here. Back to the Future, David Serrata. Can you see that there? This book it ties in well with that, because it talks, if you're like me and you were born in the 70s and as a kid watched TV in the 80s, things were a lot different in that cartoons only came on in the morning and mainly on Saturdays and Sundays. We had the Flintstones and He-Man and the Jetsons and Felix the Cat, and as I got a little bit older, it moved into like G.I. Joe and Transformers and Voltron, but with this book, and if you're as old as me, you'll be able to follow this real well. If you're a little younger, or you'll be able to follow it too if you just take a deep look at what's going on. So in the beginning, there was all these rules for TV that said, you can't just be a blatant commercial and try and get people to buy stuff. It was looked down upon, and the only paid advertisements were for like a set of knives that would chop through anything, and everybody knew that it was pure marketing and just pure, dude, I want your money. That's what those infomercials were, which they are today, but they've gotten a lot better at them. And that's what this book right here, Back to the Future, is kind of all about. It talks about those laws. There wasn't a whole lot of content, and the cartoons became, it used to be the cartoons had a little bit of a moral in them, and if you look at the old school Popeyes, or there was always maybe even Woody Woodpecker, there was always a little bit of morality, or even Bugs Bunny. They had the classical music behind them, and there was a bit of morality in some of those cartoons that would teach the kids, like, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this, or maybe you shouldn't do that. But as the culture evolved, as Madison Avenue began to understand how powerful, as everyone began to understand what Marshall Mcluhan already knew about hot and cold mediums, the hot medium being something that just goes boom directly into your brain and gives you someone else's idea without any critical thinking. A cold medium being something like print or even radio, where You take the information in, and then you have to do some critical thinking to come up with your idea. With the maturation of television and even movies, it turns people into zombies, where all of a sudden you get whatever those people want you to think. It's an incredible medium, and you can do a lot of learning, but it's imperative that you do your own critical thinking when you're doing it. TV is kind of a drug, and think about a drug that people do for 8 hours a day or 7 hours a day. It's mind-bending, and not in a good way. So back to the book. It talks about how the laws changed and how Madison Avenue slowly turned, the programming for children into shows with a little bit of morality and classical music into a 30 or 40-minute commercial with more commercials in between. They really began to understand consumerism at that point in time, and people my age were kind of the guinea pigs for that. That's where the whole consumer-led economy, I think, kind of started at. It's, you always wanted the new Voltron, and then the new G.I. Joe, or the new Strawberry Shortcake, or, whatever it was that you were watching as a kid. It slowly became like a marketing tool. And, for me, this book was insane, because I grew up in that time, and I did watch a lot of TV, and looking back on it, after reading this book, the evolution of it is it's mind-bending. It's something to think about. It seems to me, not everything, but there's a lot of stuff that was written in here that is coming true. A lot of it. Some people say that the answer to 1984 is 1776, which is kind of a fun thing to think about. But more importantly, I think that if you can read some of these books, you can kind of inoculate yourself, or your kids for that matter, or people you love, from groupthink, or wrong speak, or double speak, all these things that this lack of engagement, this lack of critical thinking that is going on in our world today is a huge problem. If you don't do your own thinking, there's a lot of people that are paid lots of money to do the thinking for you. And if you don't take some time to stop and look around, stop and think a little bit, then you're just going to be a victim. A modern day, I got into a conversation with a guy, a couple people a few weeks ago, and they were talking about the documentary Game Changers, which is it's a documentary about a plant-based diet. And I love plants, I love the earth, and there's a lot of truth to eating a plant-based diet that is good for you. However, when I watched the documentary, it was so one-sided. It was so, there was absolutely zero rebuttal from the opposite side of the field. There was no one talking about how, maybe you should have a little bit of meat for your iron in your blood. And they went on to talk about different athletes and, doctors. And I did a little research after watching that and having this conversation. And it turns out it was the same guy that made the video that made the movie Avatar, which is a great movie. And the producer is phenomenal. Don't get me wrong. A lot of money was spent on the movie. But this guy, he owns a plant-based food supplier. And then you look at the people that he interviewed, some of the doctors, they have products. Other people have written books about plant-based diets. So, that movie Game Changers is basically just like this. It's a, what do you call that? Like a hour and a half infomercial that people are paying for. So you're going to pay to watch that movie, number one, and then you're going to do what that movie tells you without any critical thinking. The guy that I spoke to, that I kind of debated about that movie, he was a pretty intelligent guy, but he was just quoting the talking points of the movie. And he was telling me, I'm going to do this. And I go, yeah, you should do it if you want to, but how are you going to measure how are you going to measure your performance? How do you know if it works? And the guy tells me, I'll just know. I go, yeah, but how will you know? And he says, well, I'll feel better. I said, well, don't you think there's a better way to do that? Maybe you should keep a journal. Maybe you could go run your 2 miles right now, see what the time is, switch to your plant-based diet, and then run that 2 miles again and see if you're faster. You can max out on your weights and see if the muscle mass is gaining faster. Maybe you could take some measurements. You know what the guy tells me? I'm not going to do any of that because it's good enough for me if I know. So I just kind of laughed it off and was like, oh, I see. You just want to watch this documentary and then go around and quote facts to people that are not really even based in fact. So anyways, here's what we got for today. 1984, George Orwell. Pick it up, read it, you got to do it. And then follow it up with this, Back to the Future, David Serrata. And if you want some bonus points, look into Edward Bernays, the godfather of propaganda. He's got a book called On Propaganda that I'll be doing another review later. If you get a chance, check him out. Anyways, thanks for your guys' time. Have a good rest of your weekend, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.